Welcome to Ferpa Training. I'm Scott Wyman and I'll be your instructor for the duration of this course. This training material is designed to help Central Texas College employees understand their responsibilities when it comes to handling student record information under Ferpa laws. CTC is legally and ethically obligated to protect the confidentiality of student records. All employees requesting access to student data are required to review this training material. So what is Ferpa? Ferpa is an acronym. It stands for the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act of 1974. Ferpa is a federal law. It's also sometimes known as the Buckley Amendment. Ferpa protects the privacy of a student's educational records. So what are student rights under Ferpa? First, students have a right to inspect and review their educational records. Second, they have the right to seek to amend incorrect records. They also have some control over the disclosure of their records. And they also have the right to file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education. Some documents that students do not have the right to access in their records are financial information submitted by a parent or legal guardian, confidential letters and recommendations placed in a student's file before January 1st, 1975, confidential letters and things of that nature related to admissions, employment, job placement, or honors to which a student has waived their right to inspect or review. They also don't have the right to access educational records containing information about other students, including grades and test scores. Requests for records should be addressed to the Office of the Registrar or Records and Registrations here on Central Campus. A student release form must be on file before any educational record information can be released. If in doubt as to whether or not information that you're going to release is related to the educational record, it's best just to not release it. If you need help or assistance, contact the Office of the Registrar for guidance. So why should I care about Ferpa? Why should you care about Ferpa? Why should you care about Ferpa? Well, if a member of the college violates Ferpa, the Department of Education can take away the college's student federal funding, and we rely on that federal funding. Also, violation of Ferpa may constitute grounds for staff dismissal, and we'd hate to lose a valuable staff member because they released information that they weren't sure as to whether or not it was an educational record. Also, it's the right thing to do. Our students depend on us to keep their academic information confidential. So some basics when it comes to Ferpa. First of all, student educational records are considered confidential and may not be released without the written consent of a student. As faculty or staff member, you have a responsibility to protect educational records in your possession. Some information, called directory information, can be released without the student's written permission. You're going to get access to student information for legitimate official college use only. You shouldn't be going out and just reading through casually a student's records to find out what kind of grades they're getting, what their attendance record is, things like that. That's not for official use. If you're ever in doubt, don't release any information until you talk to the office responsible for student records. That would be Records and Registrations or the Registrar's Office. What constitutes a student education record? Well, Ferpa's definition is a very broad definition. Essentially, records containing any information directly related to a student, whether that's personal information, academic information, things of that nature. Records can include files, documents, and material in any medium. So paper documents, paper files, electronic documents, anything that may be kept on a flash drive or a computer server up at IT, or even things maintained on your computer. Written permission must be obtained from a student before releasing an education record, unless the request fits certain narrow exceptions. We'll talk about a few of those. But a student must have that release on file, and it'll say specifically who can get it and what they can get. When in doubt, again, assume that the item is educational related and it belongs to that student, and don't release it until you seek further assistance. So what is directory information that I mentioned earlier? Directory information is information that, if released, will not normally be considered a violation of the person's privacy. Directory information may be disclosed without a student's written consent unless a student has requested that this information not be released. So what else should I know about directory information? Well, to request that directory information be made confidential, the student must submit a request to withhold, release directory information. So what else should I know about directory information? Well, to request that directory information be made confidential, the student must submit a request to withhold or release directory information in eTrieve Central. If a student requests confidentiality of directory information, it's all or nothing. They can't pick and choose to say, okay, don't give out my email address, but it's okay to give out my name. Don't give out my home address, but go ahead and give out my phone number. It's give it all out if asked for, or give out none of it when asked for. And you can find this information, you can find whether or not they've submitted this release for or withhold directory information in Colleague. If you go to the biographic information form and look all the way down at the bottom, you'll see this directory field. And if there's an N in that directory field, that means no, do not release directory information. If the field is empty, then directory information can be released. CTC considers the following information directory information: the student's name, their local address, home address, telephone number, email address, date and place of birth, participation in sports and other officially recognized activities, most recent or previous schools attended, photographs, major fields of study, dates of attendance, not daily attendance, but dates of attendance, degrees or awards and honors received, classifications such as freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and dates of graduation. In compliance with the Ferpa laws, information classified as directory information may be disclosed to the general public without prior written consent from a student unless CTC Records Office is notified in writing by that student. And they have to notify the Records Department before the 12th day of class if they're in a fall or spring semester, before the 6th day of class in an 8-week term, and before the 4th day of class during summer terms. Information will not be released until after the official certification date of each semester, term, or quarter. A request to withhold directory information may be accepted after these dates, but CTC will not be held responsible for the release of directory information prior to receiving that request. What information can be released without the student's consent? Well, there's a few situations where this comes into play. FERPA rights belong to the student at a post-secondary institution, regardless of the student's age. So a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old, 21-year-old, a 30-year-old, their education records are their property, and they only determine what third parties can gain access, with the exception of a few things specified by law, such as school employees. School employees who have a legitimate educational interest in that student records can gain access to it. If they don't have a legitimate need to know, then they shouldn't be granted access. For example, if someone from purchasing goes to the records department and says, I want to see Sally Schmally's education record. I need to go enter it in some colleague stuff. First, you would ask what department they work in. And when you find out that they're from purchasing, I don't see any reason why someone in purchasing would need to see a student's education record. Also, school officials with a need to know related to disciplinary action taken against a student may be given access to certain parts of the student's record. Legal counsel, psychologists, or collection agents are considered other school officials, as they provide types of services that would allow them to obtain access to educational records. Accrediting organizations also have access to student records. Other schools upon request in which a student is seeking to attend or intending to enroll in that school. Appropriate individuals, businesses, or entities in connection with financial aid eligibility, amounts or conditions of financial aid, or to enforce the terms or conditions of financial aid. Appropriate parties who need to know in cases of health, safety, emergencies when necessary to protect the health and safety of the student and others. Individuals requesting directory information on a student, provided the student has not requested his or her information be withheld. Certain government officials of the U.S. Department of Education, the Comptroller General, state and local educational authorities, in conjunction with an audit, authorized representatives of the U.S. Attorney General for law enforcement purposes, or state or federally supported education programs. Individuals with a judicial order, subpoena, or legally authorized request can have access to student records. State and local authorities within the juvenile justice system pursuant to specific state laws. Alleged offenders of a crime of violence, their records may be released, certain parts of the record relating to the violent crime that was committed, such as the student's name, the violation, and the results of the disciplinary hearing. Specific information regarding that crime cannot be released to the general public, but general information, as those stated, can be released. What else should you know about directory information? If you don't have a way of knowing whether or not a student has requested confidentiality of directory information, don't release it. Right? If you can't check the computer, if you can't get into Colleague and access it right now, if you don't have direct access to someone in the registrar's office or records and registration, don't give out that information until you certify, verify, and quantify the ability to release directory information. Just because you may release directory information doesn't mean you should. The college considers a student's right to privacy to be very important and does not routinely share directory information with third parties. So who's protected under FERPA? Well, the rights under FERPA apply to eligible student. An eligible student is an individual who has or is enrolled in attendance at Central Texas College regardless of their age. Except in a few specific circumstances specified by law, third parties may be given access to student records only with the signed and dated permission of the student. School officials with a legitimate educational interest may access student educational records without this written permission. Simply being an employee, however, is not a legitimate reason. Being a spouse is not a legitimate reason. Being a parent is not a legitimate reason to access student records. You have to have written permission with the exception of employees with legitimate needs to know and others as specified earlier. Some important reminders for faculty members. Don't display student scores or grades publicly in association with names, CTCD numbers, or even the last 4 digits of a social security number or other personal identifiers. These are all considered violations of FERPA laws. Don't put papers or lab reports containing student names and grades in publicly accessible places. Students should not have access to the scores and grades of others in their class. In other words, don't just set a stack of papers down on a desk and say, all right, y'all come up and get your quiz results or your test scores or your homework returned to you. Because as students are rifling through that stack of papers to find theirs, they're seeing other students' names and grades or scores on those papers. So hand those out individually. Don't share student educational record information, including grades or grade point averages, with other faculty or staff unless that other faculty or staff has a legitimate educational interest. Just being another faculty member isn't a reason to share student education records. Don't share information by phone or other correspondence, including email and text. Don't share information from student education records, including grades or grade point average. If a student sends you a text and says, hey, professor, can I get my results of the last quiz or the last test? Do not send that score over the phone via text or email, because you have no way of verifying who is on the other end of that request. Don't circulate a printed class list with the students' names and social security numbers as an attendance sheet. Keep that information private. CTC has certain compliance requirements under FERPA. In order to be in compliance, CTC must meet the following requirements and provisions. We must provide annual notification to students of their right to inspect and review their records, request to amend their educational records, place a statement in their records setting forth their view of the contested information, we must also let them know that they have the right to request that the college not disclose any directory information about them. They have the right to file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education. And we must give them full disclosure that only certain school officials will be granted access to their education records. The employee must have a legitimate need to know. We have to let students know what information CTC considers to be directory information. It's posted on our website. We notify them via other correspondence every year. We have to provide students access to their educational records whenever they request it. So please contact the college registrar's office, there's their phone number, or by email, which is their preferred method of contact, if you have questions about education records and releasing that information. All necessary forms are available in eTree's Central Form Library, as well as on the CTC website. Some employee precautions, and these are just general, I guess you could say, computer security precautions. Don't let other people perform tasks on your computer while you are logged in, because you're responsible for everything that happens on that computer, whether you're typing it in or mousing over it or whatever the case may be. Even if you're there watching over their shoulder, don't let other people use your computer with your login information. Be alert to suspicious behavior. Ask questions. Listen for other people's questions regarding procedures and visitors entering the area, because they may not be authorized. They might not be an authorized employee to be in that area. People can take little bits of information that they overhear from different sources and put those together and eventually create a complete student educational record if they hear enough information. So be aware of who's around. Employees should not discuss with friends or unauthorized users or update or access student records. An unauthorized change to a student's records is grounds for immediate dismissal. Remain knowledgeable regarding college and governmental policies for use of educational information. Again, if you're in doubt, contact the registrar's office, ask them questions. They'll be more than glad to help you out. All requests for student information should come from the registrar's office. Outside sources requesting information should submit their request to the registrar's office, and so that information, the request, will come from the registrar's office to you if necessary. Employees who terminate or transfer must have their usernames and password canceled. This kind of falls on supervisors. Make sure you let IT know when an employee leaves your area so that they can revoke those colleague access privileges. You should always place your monitor so that visitors can't view the information on your monitor when they walk in. Passwords limit entries to the computer system. So again, don't let other people in under your password. Keep printed materials such as student official files, admissions applications, registration forms, transcripts, and things of that nature turned face down or out of sight of visitors. So again, access licenses are limited in colleague. We only allow a certain number of people in there at one time. So when you're done doing what it is you're doing in colleague, go ahead and log out. You can log back in later. If you can't log in later because the system's full, then wait a few minutes and see if you can go back in. But there's no need to log into colleague and then just leave that sitting open throughout the rest of the day just in case you might need it. Somebody else might need it but can't get access because you've got that user license locked up. Lock your office if you have your own office. Lock your office when you leave. That's just double protection. You should lock your computer. You should lock your office. Removable disks, not that we use removable disks anymore. We'll say flash drives with student data must be protected just as if it were on a piece of paper or on the screen. If you have to leave your computer and there's student information on a flash drive, disconnect that flash drive and take it with you. We should take extra care when dealing with student emails. Make sure we don't send them information through emails that would be considered educational. Okay? Unauthorized release or use of information violates federal law and jeopardizes not only the employee but the entire college. Violations of Ferpa laws should be reported to the department supervisor for investigation and any necessary corrections. So now we're going to roll into some learning scenarios. It's not a test, it's not even a quiz. It's just I'm going to go through these with you, give you a minute to think about the possible answer, and then we'll just roll on. So Jane Goodness, a student at CTC, has been in an accident. The off-campus law enforcement agent calls CTC and asks for Jane's home address, telephone number, and emergency notification contact. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? If you said, release the information requested to the authorities, then you're right. Because it's an emergency situation. You can go ahead and release. All they're asking for essentially is directory information, right? Address, phone number, emergency contacts. Nothing in there is going to give them educational record information. Next one. Rip Van Winkle, the training specialist at Central Texas College, asks you to give him several records of current students so that he can enter them into the colleague education account. What are you going to do? If you said, not going to release that information because training specialist, employee training specialist, why would a training specialist need student records? No need. No educational need. No legitimate educational need there. Next we have, you get a phone call, and according to the caller ID, it's an internal caller. The person says that they're calling from the Information Technology Department. The caller informs you that the colleague system is showing error messages for your profile and they need your login and password to track down the source of the system errors. What are you going to do? Well, they are IT, right? If IT needs information, we're supposed to give them information, right? No, don't give anybody your passwords. IT should already know your usernames because they gave them to you, but they don't need your passwords. Yes, they gave you your initial default password, but then you should have gone in and changed that. Even if you didn't, IT will never call and ask for your password. Okay, this is probably somebody out there doing some phishing. Don't release it. Don't give anybody your password. Don't share your passwords with anybody. A tuition reimbursement officer from a local employer calls to verify that their employee is enrolled at CTC. What are you going to do? Tuition reimbursement officer. We're talking financial aid here, right? And all he's looking for is just verification that someone is enrolled. Hey, is Billy Bob enrolled at CTC? Because he's getting some, financial aid from us. Go ahead and release the information. That's no big deal. Verify, look in colleague, yes, Billy Bob is enrolled, or no, Billy Bob is not enrolled. This is considered directory information. But again, if the student has submitted that non-disclosure of directory information, check the bio screen in colleague, look for that, that disclosure. If there's an N, don't release it. Don't just give it out because it's directory information. You still have to check and make sure the student didn't give or didn't submit that form. Even then, you might want to contact the registrar's office and see if this information can be given out, even if the student requests not to disclose directory information. Then we have, you receive a request for a release of academic and financial information from an attorney's office for a student who is deceased. Attached to the document is an authorization signed by the deceased student's spouse. What are you going to do? What are we going to do? Well, I'll tell you what I would do. I would refer them to the registrar's office with the indication that student information is not disclosed to third parties. Yeah, you feel sad because the student's deceased. You feel bad for the spouse. But just being the spouse of a deceased student is not a legal need to know. Okay? So check with the registrar's office, refer them to the registrar's office so that it can be taken care of properly. Cannot release it without the student's consent. John Smith, wearing his CTCD badge from the records department, drops by your office and asks you to use your computer. He was in your building and dropped off some documents, and then he realized that he needed some information from a colleague to send an email to Germany. Not only does he ask to use your computer, but he needs to get on the colleague system for some data included in the email, and he has forgotten his password. Poor John. He's on a deadline. If he doesn't get this information out right away, there may be disastrous consequences. What are you going to do? Log off of your computer, step away, and let John log in. If he doesn't have his password because he forgot it, then he can call IT and get his password reset. It takes minutes. He's not on that much of a deadline. Call IT. Hey IT, can you reset my password? They'll hook him up. But do not let him access anything under your username and password. Next we have Ms. Mary, overprotective, comes in and requests to know the grades from the previous term of her 17-year-old daughter. There is no records release form on file, but she shows you her income tax form showing you that she claims her daughter as a dependent. What are you going to do? If you said do not release the information, then you are correct. Just because she is the student's mother doesn't give her legal access to student records. Remember, a student in attendance at CTC, no matter what their age, has total control of their records. They determine who gets in there and looks, other than people who are required under law and employees with a legitimate need to know. While you're working on a state report full of student data, a student stops by and asks you for directions. What are you going to do? This should be an easy one too. You should minimize the current screen on your computer, turn your monitor off or something of that nature so that the student can't see your monitor, and then you can help the student. You can give them whatever direction it is they're looking for. A reporter from the local newspaper calls and asks you for the classification and enrollment status of a student who just won a national talent competition. The reporter is preparing a feature article on her. What are you going to do? As long as a student has not requested that their directory information be withheld, you can release this information, because again, they're not looking for anything outside of that directory information realm. You're with a group of co-workers at a local restaurant. One of them asks you if you got a chance to finish Patricia Fitzgerald's prospect file. She begins to then remark about what a great student she would make, especially with grades like hers. She mentions that she knows that the recruiters have been targeting the San Saba area for new students. What would you do? What would you do? If you're thinking that maybe you should change the subject and not discuss student information with other employees in a public environment, then you're probably correct. Not the right time, not the right place, not the right people to be discussing student educational records. You're an instructor and one of your students calls and asks you for her test scores over the telephone. What are you going to do? Some people might say, well, I'm going to ask her for her date of birth to verify that she is who she is. Or I'll ask her for some other bit of personal information to verify she is who she is. Well, unless you can specifically verify that she is who she is on the other end of that phone, do not give any information out. Because a friend would know her birthday, a mom, a dad, an aunt, an uncle may know her social security number. So you just can't be too sure. Best thing to do in this situation, tell that student when your office hours are, ask them to stop by during those office hours, and you'll be glad to give them their test scores and answer any questions they have. The SACS team, which is the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, submits a request for a list of students that they want to talk to in order to find out how the QEP is doing. QEP. What are you going to do? SACS, QEP, acronyms, indication of important stuff. QEP, Quality Enhancement Program, in case you're not familiar. If you said go ahead and release the information because SACS is an accrediting organization with a legitimate interest in that student information, go ahead, give it to them. Give it to them. Just make sure that they are who they say they are. All right, so that does it, folks. Again, if you have any questions, contact the registrar's office. You may want to contact the Records and Registration office. They've both helped me in creating and gathering information for this course, so I know firsthand that they're there and they will help you. So, with that, I'll say stay healthy, stay happy, stay safe, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.